Can't you just feel it? The conflict is becoming apparent in our culture. It reminds me of those words of John Paul II. We're now living in the final confrontation between the gospel and the anti-gospel, between the church and the anti-church, between Christ and the antichrist. And if we don't choose to know God's word, to believe God's word, and follow God's word, we're going to be a sitting duck for all kinds of confusion, all kinds of disorder. Those are really important choices that people have to make.
And these choices are difficult. Who am I going to marry? What kind of life am I going to live? How am I going to raise my kids? What am I going to do with my time, my talent, and my treasure? And I have to make a choice today. Jesus says to each one of us, I came that you might have life and have it to the full. The question is, do we want it? Welcome, friends, to another week of The Choices We Face. I'm Peter Herbeck, and I'm here today with Dr. Monique Ruberu, and she's a doctor from Philadelphia. She's a happily married mother of 5. 2 are in heaven, if I understand that correctly. Blessed be God. And she's a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist, but she's a very unique OBGYN. She's a convinced Catholic. She's she's been trained in NAPRO technology, which she'll tell us about. And she's pro-life, like she's strongly pro-life. She's a pro-life warrior. And she's really blazing a trail in women's healthcare in just such a unique way. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. So there's really 2 things we want to talk about. We're blessed to be able to have Dr. Ruberu on the show twice this year. So I want to begin tonight with her amazing testimony, which is very, very moving. So are you okay with starting there?
I would love to. Yeah. It's such a joy to be able to be here and to share what God has done in my life, because he is just such an amazing father. Yeah. And my story kind of begins as a cradle Catholic. I was born into a Catholic family, and my parents tried really hard to make sure that we were exposed to the faith. I went to a Catholic university and then ultimately to medical school. But along the way, I really kind of developed into this cafeteria Catholic kind of lifestyle where I would go to Mass every Sunday, but it was literally just kind of a check the box sort of faith. I didn't have a true relationship with Jesus in any way. I really didn't feel an attachment to Our Lady in any way. But I was just doing the things that I knew I should do as a Catholic. And then I ended up getting married after meeting my husband in Sri Lanka. And we had 2 beautiful children, continued on with this kind of way of life. He also was raised similarly as a Catholic, and we would go to Mass on Sunday, but that was kind of about it. Then at about the 10-year mark of our marriage was on the brink of divorce. And God brought people into our life and literally saved our marriage. Around that time, I had somehow come across Abby Johnson's unplanned book in our church library.
Some of our listeners may not know who she is. Why don't you tell us who she is?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Abby Johnson is an amazing woman who started off volunteering at Planned Parenthood and ultimately worked her way up to becoming a director of Planned Parenthood. She was very successful in that role. And while doing that, she was actually given a great honor of being one of the best directors of Planned Parenthood. And she was asked one day to come in and hold the ultrasound during an abortion procedure. And when she did that, she saw the abortion taking place. She saw the baby fighting for its life. And that was the end of it. She wasn't able to continue on in that pro-choice Planned Parenthood lifestyle. And she left. And then that was the beginning of her journey to become one of the greatest pro-life warriors that I've ever met. She's one of my friends, and at that time, I didn't know her, but reading her testimony just planted these amazing seeds deep inside of me about the importance of standing up for life, the importance of showing up outside of an abortion center and offering resources in a kind, loving, compassionate way. And that's something that I had never done before. So when God number one, he brought the understanding of kind of why our marriage broke down. It was a lack of priority. My parents, unfortunately, their marriage didn't last either. And I never learned from anybody the importance of placing God first, and then your spouse, and then your children, and then everything else. And that understanding of that's how it should be really changed my view on marriage and what my role was supposed to be in it. Then he brought all of these people into my life who showed me lots of situations where things were happening that were far worse than what was happening in our marriage, and how those marriages had been healed. And that really gave me hope as to, wow, not only can our marriage be saved, but my children can be saved from becoming children of a divorced family.
Yeah.
When I began to understand how divorce impacts a person, and I realized that all of the traits of children of divorced families, that I possessed all of them myself, I definitely didn't want that for my children. I wanted them to grow up in a home where the mother and father were working through challenges and supporting one another and loving one another, and that they would understand that they had a stable home where they could always come to and bring their families to. And so we were so blessed to have our marriage saved. And I felt like I needed to do something to pay God back in a big way. And it had to be something that was completely outside of the realm of what I was normally used to doing. Like when my children got sick and they would be healed, I would always, say, okay, I'll say a rosary, or I'll go and feed the homeless, or something like that. But this had to be different. And so when I was searching for that different thing to do, I started remembering everything that I had read in Abby's book. And I realized that I needed to go and stand outside of an abortion center and offer help to these women. I was scared to death because although I was personally pro-life, throughout my life, I was never one to talk about abortion. I always was more of that pro-life, but on the fence kind of person, somebody who would say, yes, abortion is wrong, not even really understanding how exactly it was done. But then I wouldn't say that I could tell somebody who was raped or somebody who was a victim of incest that they couldn't have an abortion. I really didn't understand the importance of every single life, and how no matter what the situation is, every life needs to be fought for. And so when I decided to go and stand outside of this abortion center, I was scared to death. I stood outside of this abortion. I actually went outside of the abortion center the first time, and there was nobody there. And I didn't know if I would get arrested. I didn't know, what would happen. So I stayed in my car and prayed a rosary, and then I left. And I felt like I had completely not done what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
So then I looked again, and I found another place that I could go the following Saturday. And it happened to be a day where we were in the middle of a blizzard, and I showed up at 6:30 in the morning. It's pitch black outside, snow everywhere. And I was like, here we go again. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I just sat there in my car, and somebody came and knocked on the door, and they were like, are you here for an abortion? And I said, no, I'm here to pray. And they said, oh, come with me. And he was disappointed that I wasn't there and he couldn't save my life. Yeah. Okay, and so I got outside and I prayed with them. And then after a while, I felt like it wasn't enough to just stand there and pray, that I had to actually start talking to the women. So I got off the sidewalk, grabbed some flyers, and I started trying to speak to the women, saying, I'm a pro-life OBGYN. Can I help you? Please don't do this today. It was so hard watching 30 plus cars coming in, knowing that each one of these cars carried a woman who was getting ready to end the life of her child. Freezing cold, my face was frozen, tears streaming down my face, because I'm just imagining each one of these children. And then somebody chose life on that day. It was a woman who was from Bangladesh. And I think she was just more shocked to see a brown person out there.
Yeah.
And she didn't know what to do. So it made her pause. And then somebody else who had experience with ministering to these women came up and took her aside and talked to her about resources and got her over to the Crisis Pregnancy Center. And she chose life that day. And it was such a celebration out there. And that's the first time that I really stopped and thought about the meaning of each individual life, how that one individual life is so important, how each and every person, if you think back to your grandfather, if your grandfather was aborted, how many people would be missing at this point in your life? And it's just so important to defend each and every person, because every person has a role, a specific job that God has created them for. And when that person is aborted, that entire plan is just cut off.
Yeah.
And so I was standing out there and a gentleman comes up to me and he's like, "Who are you and what do you do?" And I said, "I'm a pro-life OBGYN. And he says, "My pop sent you." And I'm like, "I don't know who your pop is." It turned out, later on, I researched to find out who this man's pop was. His father was John Stanton. John Stanton was the patriarch of the pro-life community in Philadelphia. This man was a faithful Catholic, a father of 13. He started the pro-life union. He started 2 women's homes where unwed moms could come and live. He would house women in his house. He started a chastity club for teens. This man did everything. He was a daily communicant. And every day when he went to Mass, he would ask God to send a pro-life OBGYN to start a Gianna Center.
Yeah.
And his kids all knew it. And I showed up the day after he died.
Wow.
And so when his kids showed up on that day to take his place outside of the abortion center, because this man used to pray outside of every abortion center in Philadelphia. And he prayed in front of Gosnell's place before anyone was even talking about Gosnell.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And when he passed away and I showed up the next day, and for the first time in my life, I referred to myself as a pro-life OBGYN. It was such a God incidence that the words just came out in that way. The next day, that gentleman, Patrick, his eldest son, dropped off at my office a book about NAPRO technology. I had never even heard about NAPRO technology. And NAPRO technology is natural procreative technology. It's a method of addressing every GYN issue and infertility without the use of contraceptives or IVF. And so when I read this book, I was blown away because I desperately wanted to practice according to my faith. But all I knew how to do was to use contraceptives and refer people for IVF in order to address these issues. So when I opened that book and I read about all of these different things, I was so happy. I went to the cupboard and I opened it up and I took out all the contraceptives and I read them and I said, yes, every single one of these are an abortifacient. Every single one of these thins the inner lining of the uterus and it prevents a baby from implanting. And then I knew that I could absolutely stop writing them and I could go and get trained in this. And it was amazing because that day outside of the abortion center, Patrick was so excited to meet me. And he said, well, this is great. Now you're going to, stay on and start a Gianna Center. I had no idea what a Gianna Center even was at that time. And I was pro-life just because I was against abortion. But I didn't know anything about, what contraceptives truly did and why they were such a bad thing. I just knew that the church was against them. And so
you had no training in it? Like you go through the whole
when I was in medical
degree? Yeah.
No, when I was in medical school, they literally said, there is a thing called natural family planning. It doesn't work. Don't even think about it. That was their only word on natural family planning. And I'm assuming that they were thinking about the very old natural family planning methods that were a little bit convoluted and difficult to use. But nowadays, the methods that we use are so scientifically based. They're so wonderful. And they really help couples to join together and strengthen their marriage. It helps all women have an understanding of the hormonal underpinnings of what's going on in their body. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. And so you got the book. Did you read the whole book?
I read the whole book in one sitting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
It was so fantastic. And at the same time, it was really interesting because I started going and praying outside of abortion centers with Patrick because he had wanted me to, commit to staying on and starting the center and everything else. But at that time, I had plans to move to Dallas because I wanted to be near to my family. And he said, no, you've got to pray about this. You've got to stay here in Philadelphia. And I said, no problem. I'll pray about this. So I asked God if we were intended to stay in Philadelphia to let us know by not allowing my husband to find the appropriate job in Dallas, something that he would fall in love with. And God did that. Over the time that we were praying, my husband would interview and he just never found anything. So then I assumed, right, God wants us to stay here. I reached out to the hospital management and they said, we have been actually looking for someone to stay and to do NAPR technology. John Stanton had actually been canvassing the hospital for months and months and months before he died. And he had brought the NAPR technology textbook to the hospital. It was sitting 8 feet away from me in my office manager's office for months because they were trying to get another physician to do it from my office. God is just so amazing. And then the hospital administration agreed to send me for training, and they decided that because I was going to practice differently, that I had to be in my own practice. And I really didn't want to do that. I just wanted to practice as a typical gynecologist and not write contraceptives, but still do everything else. But at that time, because I refused to write contraceptives, several of the other doctors, females, refused to cross cover with me because I wasn't writing contraceptives.
Which means what? Cross cover?
So when you are working in an obstetric practice and you're delivering babies, you can't deliver babies every single night. So several people will be in a group and they'll cross cover each other, meaning that I will deliver all of your babies one night, you deliver all of my babies the next night, and like that. So they refused to have anything to do with me because I wouldn't write contraceptives. And this is in a Catholic hospital. And so administration didn't want to tell them that they had to do anything. And so I was kind of left out to dry a little bit. And I was very upset.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, my salary was cut. And I was told that in order to make up some of my salary, I could work as like an emergency physician on the labor and delivery floor, serving these people that refused to cross cover with me. So I did it, and I was very angry while I was doing it. But finally, I hated being angry. So I asked God to love them through me so that I could find a way to work with them. And he did that, and it made things a lot better. But then it was interesting because now the hospital had set me up with my own practice, but I wasn't really making enough money, I'm sure, for them to be happy. So then they said, I think it's time for you to own your practice. And I was like, I really don't want to own my practice. I just want to be an employee. And they said, no, you need to own your practice. So then I owned my practice. So then they said, now it's time for you to own your employees. And I said, no, I don't want to own my employees.
Now, were they just simply distancing themselves from the nature of what you were doing?
I don't know if it was that or I just wasn't profitable enough and they saw me more as a burden.
Okay.
But I'm not sure what the real reasoning was. But nonetheless, God, I think, planned all of that. Because what ultimately happened was I owned my practice. The employees were my own. I was the business owner of this practice, and then COVID happened, and I refused the COVID vaccine because all of the COVID vaccines, they used aborted fetal cell lines in order to actually produce them and do the research for them. So as a pro-life OBGYN, I felt very strongly that I didn't want to participate in these vaccines. And although I wrote that in my letters asking for an exemption, it was refused. And I was told that my religious exemption couldn't be given to me.
Did they give you a reason for it?
They said that it was because Pope Francis said that the COVID vaccines were okay. So since I was Catholic, I needed to get the COVID vaccine.
Wow.
And so I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. So you can take my hospital privileges. And I stopped working on labor and delivery, and I was just going to work in my office. And then they said, we're really sorry, but we need your space because the people across the hall
One thing
need
after another, yeah.
more space. And so I said, okay, I need a little bit more time. So we kept putting it off. But then ultimately, it was like Thanksgiving. And it was a week before Thanksgiving, and they said, you have to be out by Thanksgiving. And I said, I honestly don't know where I'm going to go. And they're like, well, I'm sorry. So my patients would come up to me and they're like, Dr. Ruberu, where are you moving to? We want to follow you. And I said, I don't know, but when I know, I'll let you know. And one of my friends texted me and they're like, check with this other physician who happened to own a suite inside of this hospital's medical office building. And I checked with him and he had exactly what I needed for the exact price that I needed. And he was an amazing man who was willing to let me move in and gave me his office space and moved all of his things out and allowed me to decorate my spaces the way I wanted to. So I put all, holy pictures everywhere, holy pictures on my desk, play Christian music in my office. We didn't miss a single day of work. We left for Thanksgiving. I came back on the Sunday, moved everything over into this new office and started work the next day. And looking back, I can see that it was entirely God's plan, because if things went the way that I wanted them to go, I would have been in that initial office working as an employee of the hospital. And as soon as COVID hit, I would have lost everything. I wouldn't have been able to practice as a gynecologist anymore because I wouldn't have had privileges and nobody else would have given me privileges. I wouldn't have owned my own practice. I wouldn't have been able to take my employees with me. I wouldn't have even been able to invite my patients to go with me because the patients would have belonged to the hospital. But God made it all happen so that I could practice independently, that I could minister to all of my patients in my office, talk to them about chastity, talk to them about marriage, talk to them about root cause medicine and natural treatments, talk to them, help them with their COVID vaccine exemptions. It was just such a gift.
It really does sound like the sovereign hand of God. Now, One thing that had to happen to make that all possible is for your marriage to be healed.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about your husband. I keep thinking about him as a husband, a father, and grandfather, and all. I'm thinking he's been on that whole journey with you.
Yeah, I am.
And
married.
say a little bit more about how the Lord brought healing to you and the difference it's made in your marriage, because I'm sure there's people listening who are like, I want to know more about,
I am married to the most beautiful man in the world. He is so wonderful. He's an amazing father, an amazing husband. And we have both, when I think back to the people that we were in the initial 10 years of our marriage, and I think now to where we are now, we're both completely different people.
In what way?
We've learned to communicate in a much more beautiful manner. We are able to actually listen to one another. We invest in our marriage. Every single week we have date night. We never miss date night, no matter what's happening, whether it's date night at home versus date night out. We always put that time aside for one another. We just have so much fun together. He is so invested in supporting me, in supporting the office, in supporting the mission, in supporting everything I do in pro-life. And he's a remarkable man. He works so hard. He works like 3 different jobs to provide for us in order to make sure that if at any time I wanted to stop working, that it wouldn't be an issue. He's just incredibly loving and kind and compassionate. And his faith journey has been so beautiful. I think along the way, one of the first things that I learned when I had my massive reversion and I fell so in love with Jesus and I just wanted to shout his name from the mountaintops, I realized that I couldn't force him to have that same experience at the same time. And so I love Jesus and I was so excited about it. But he kind of had to come along on his own path in his own time. Mm-hmm. And he has really stepped into the role of being the spiritual head of our family. He goes with us to Catholic Family Land every year, the Apostolate for Family Consecration, and he participates in activities there. He makes sure that we go to Mass. He initiated a family rosary for us at home. It's just, I'm so blessed.
Yeah, he's got to be quite a man to walk this walk together. It's just the Lord made it possible for the two of you to share in a much larger mission.
Yeah.
And I can't help but thinking about John Stanton. I've never met him. I'd heard about him. And he's probably got the ear of the Lord in heaven. He probably is the one that can't get her, Lord, while she's there, you know? And,
I wish I had the opportunity to meet him and talk to him before he passed away. But I feel like I have gotten to know him through his eldest son, because everybody says that his eldest son, Patrick, is so similar to him. And he's literally doing everything that his dad was doing previously.
Well, we're so blessed to be able to have you on another show coming up. And we'll talk a little bit more about, deeper dive into what is NAPRO technology, what difference is it making for women, what you're seeing, stories and testimonies to encourage those who are listening. But I also came across Rising with Roses.
Yes.
Your book, your story about your conversion. You can get Dr. Monique's book on Amazon.
It's on Amazon, yeah.
Yeah, and this beautiful testimony. It'll take a little bit of a deeper dive, but also I want to offer to you a new booklet I just wrote called Does God Judge? Isn't that an interesting question? Does God judge? And there's a variety of reasons I wrote it, but one of the reasons is for each and every one of us, every single person on the planet, we have an appointment in our future. The Lord has set the time when we will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And the Lord, mercy and justice exist perfectly in the heart of God. And the Lord wants all of us, while we still can, to come to understand that moment is in our future and to give our lives to him and to receive his mercy so that that day can be the most spectacular day you'll ever experience in your entire life. And if you could just look at the number on the screen, we can get out to you a free copy. But until next week, this is Peter Herbeck and Dr. Monique Ruberu saying, let's walk in the grace and glory of God. God bless you. From Genesis to Revelation, the judgment of God is a central biblical theme. Yet it's a subject most people want to avoid. Jesus and the apostles remind us that all of us will appear before the judgment seat of Christ to give an account for our lives. For those prepared, it will be a moment of inexpressible joy and total fulfillment. For those unprepared, it will be a moment of great terror. In this short booklet, we will consider God's judgments in history and at our death and upon the Lord's return. My prayer is that this fundamental truth leads you to a deeper conversion and total surrender to his great mercy. Get your first copy for free today by visiting our website or calling the number on the screen.